He sat across from me with a smirk that never left his face. I had just finished answering his question about database scaling when he chuckled, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Sorry, I can't take you seriously. You sound like a cartoon villain." For a second, I didn't understand. I thought maybe he was joking. I gave a small smile. But then he laughed louder, looked at the other guy in the room, and said, "Don't you think? Like Eurobond villain or something. Can't even focus with that voice." My smile faded. I looked at the other man. He didn't laugh. He just looked away, uncomfortable. I sat still. The silence stretched. Brad, his name tag said Brad, head of engineering, didn't seem to care. He picked up a can of energy drink, took a sip, and said, "Anyway, we're really looking for someone who vibes with the team culture, you know? Fast, fluent, easy to communicate with. Maybe this isn't the right fit." I stood up. "Thanks for your time," I said simply. My voice was quiet. My accent thick. I didn't hide it. Brad blinked. "Wait, you're leaving?" I didn't answer. I walked out of that glass meeting room, down the hallway with its fake greenery, and past the receptionist, who didn't look up. Outside, the cold air hit my face. My ears burned. I'd never felt smaller. But inside my chest, something burned hotter. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know that I wasn't just another immigrant trying to break into tech. I wasn't desperate for the job. I already had enough money to retire early if I wanted. I had built 2 companies back home, sold one, kept one running from a distance. I came to New York for a challenge, not for survival. And Brad? Brad just lit a match inside me. That night, I sat in my apartment and opened my laptop. I started researching. Who owned the company? Who were the investors? Were they profitable? How stable was their funding? The answers came fast. They were bleeding cash, trying to raise a new round. Their product looked shiny, but their user base was weak. I could see the cracks. And I knew people, VCs who trusted me, engineers who'd follow me. I could raise capital. I could make this happen. Brad didn't know it yet, but in 6 months, I'd be his boss. He thought my accent made me small. It was going to be the last thing he heard before I fired him. You ever been disrespected so hard you buy the whole company just to fire one guy? I hadn't planned it that way. Honestly, I just wanted a fresh start in the US. I had no interest in revenge. But something about Brad's smirk, his words, the way he laughed at my accent, that stuck. It stayed with me. I heard it every time I closed my eyes. So I made a call. Alex was a friend of mine from business school. Smart guy. Now a partner at a mid-size VC firm. We hadn't spoken in a year, but when I told him I had an idea and a target, he was interested. "I want to take over a small startup," I told him. "They just burned me in an interview. But more than that, they're weak. Bad product market fit. Lazy leadership. I can turn it around." He laughed. "You're serious? You want to buy it just to prove a point?" "No," I said. "I want to buy it because it's broken. Proving a point is just a bonus." We started digging. The startup was called Gridform, and from the outside, they looked sleek. Nice website, big buzzwords. But under the hood, they were bleeding money. They were surviving off a bridge round they raised last year. Their last public update on product growth was over 6 months old. Classic sign of a struggling team. The founders had given up control to a board of investors. That was my way in. Alex helped me set up a holding company, Blue Ridge Tech Partners. Nothing that could be traced back to me. Through it, we started buying small chunks of the parent company from secondary markets and angel investors who were looking to exit. Quietly, piece by piece. At the same time, I started showing up in their ecosystem. I wrote articles, attended tech meetups, made noise about startup culture, company ethics, and leadership. I didn't name them directly, but anyone inside would feel the heat. I also found 2 employees from Gridform who had recently quit. One of them, a developer named Priya, told me stories that made my blood boil. Brad wasn't just rude, he was toxic. Harassed junior team members, took credit for others' work, called foreign engineers offshore bugs. That gave me more fuel. I passed word to a few journalists I knew. Not a full expose, just rumors, a whisper of unrest inside Gridform. Let the public pressure grow. Let the investors get nervous. By month 4, I owned 18% of the company, enough to get a seat at the table. Brad still had no idea. To him, I was long gone. Just some awkward guy with a funny accent he embarrassed in a meeting. He had no clue I was already inside the walls, watching every move and pulling strings. Small wins, one at a time, and soon he'd start to feel it. I walked into the lobby of Gridform on a rainy Tuesday morning. Clean white walls, fake plants, one too loud playlist playing from a speaker near the coffee bar. Everything about it screamed, "We're trying too hard." I gave the receptionist my name. Well, the name I was using. Mark Dobrev, consultant. Strategy and operations, hired through a third-party firm that the board trusted. No one at Gridform knew my real background, especially not Brad. He walked past me in the hallway that same morning. Brief glance. No spark of recognition. He didn't remember me. Good. We were now in the same building, but on very different paths. My first week, I kept quiet. Observed. Took notes. Sat in meetings without talking much. Brad didn't bother to remember my name. He interrupted me twice in a single meeting and made a joke about consultant types who talk smart and do nothing. I smiled politely, said nothing. Every insult, every bad decision he made, I kept track of it. I wasn't there just to fire him. I wanted the board to want him gone. I wanted it to look like their idea. It didn't take long to find cracks. He blamed interns for his missed deadline. Sent 3 a.m. Slack messages cursing at his team. One engineer told me Brad once threatened to cut her bonus because she spoke up in a planning meeting. Another, a guy named Luis, pulled me aside in the break room. "You new here?" he asked. "Kind of. Strategy and ops." He leaned closer. "Watch your back. Brad's cool with you until he's not. Then it gets nasty." I told him thanks and offered to grab lunch sometime. That was the beginning of my quiet alliance build. I treated every person Brad ignored like they mattered. I listened, asked questions, showed up. People started opening up. By the third week, I had built a private report, screenshots, Slack threads, email chains, and even a voice memo from a junior designer who quit after Brad screamed at her in front of a client. I kept it all safe. At the same time, I started slipping reports to the board. Nothing aggressive, just red flags, gaps in leadership, declining team morale, missed deadlines, rooted in poor internal communication, I wrote. They listened. They asked for a deeper performance review, and they picked me to lead it. Brad still didn't know who I really was. Still thought I was just some outside guy giving advice. But I knew everything. I knew where he sat, who he blamed, what he feared. He didn't see the knife in the dark. Not yet. But it was getting closer. The boardroom was cold that morning. Real cold. Not just the air, but the way people were acting. Tight smiles, short greetings, no small talk. Brad walked in late, as usual, wearing a hoodie and sneakers like he owned the place. He looked around, then dropped into his seat like he couldn't care less. I sat across from him, flipping through a printed folder. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "Let's begin," one of the board members said. "Mark, you've prepared a report for us?" I nodded and stood. What followed wasn't a report. It was a slow, methodical gutting. I went over timelines, team turnover, missed KPIs, and toxic behavior reports. Every slide had a quote, a number, a receipt. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at Brad directly. Then I got to the messages. One board member shifted in his seat. Another looked at the screen and frowned hard. Slide after slide showed screenshots from Slack and email. Brad making fun of foreign names. Brad sending links to jokes about accents, mocking team members behind their backs, calling them code monkeys or offshore risks. And then there was the big one. "I don't hire people who talk like that." The same line he said to me in my interview. This time in writing. Sent to a coworker, followed by a laughing emoji. Silence fell over the room. I clicked again. The next slide showed his expense reports. Dinners billed to the company that weren't business-related. One trip to Vegas marked as a client conference. No client had been there. Someone near the end of the table cleared their throat. "Mark," the head of the board said slowly. "How did you get access to this?" "Employee testimonials. Whistleblower reports. HR gave me access with full approval for this review," I said calmly. Brad sat back in his chair, arms crossed, face slowly turning red. "This is a hit job," he said. "You're twisting my words." "No," I replied. "Your words are printed exactly as you wrote them." That's when HR stepped in. "We'll be placing Brad on immediate leave," the director said, "pending full investigation. His company accounts will be locked starting today." Brad stood up fast. "You can't be serious." But they were. As he stormed out, I finally looked up at him. I didn't say a word, just watched. A week later, the HR team printed out one of those Slack quotes, the worst one, and pinned it to their office wall. Right under it, they framed his official termination notice. A warning for anyone who thought accents made someone laugh. His words came back, loud and clear. Brad walked into the boardroom like he always did, grinning, spinning his keys on one finger, acting like he owned the place. He didn't know this would be his last time doing that. The board sat around the long glass table, quiet, watching him. He looked around and gave a shrug. "So," he said, tossing his keys on the table, "what's this all about? Some HR drama again?" No one answered. I was already seated, next to the chairman. "Calm. Ready." Brad's eyes passed over me, but he still didn't recognize. The chairman cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the audit," he said flatly, "and the board has reached a decision." Brad laughed. "Let me guess, sensitivity training? A week off without pay." I opened the folder in front of me and slid it across the table. Inside, Copies of HR complaints, messages, expense records, and formal statements from employees. I don't think you understand, I said quietly. This isn't about a slap on the wrist. This is about trust, Brad. And you lost it. He looked at the papers. Then up at me. He frowned. You again? Wait. You're. Yes, I said. That's me. The guy with the cartoon villain accent. He blinked. Then laughed, too loud. No way. No freaking way. This is a setup. You planned this whole thing. I didn't answer. The chairman spoke again. Brad, the board has voted to remove you from your position. Effective immediately. Your access will be cut by noon. A security escort is waiting. The room stayed silent. Brad's smile vanished. You can't be serious, he said. I built this team. This company. No, I said. You built a toxic mess. And you did it with a smirk. You made good people feel small. And now it's your turn. He turned to the board. You're siding with him? He doesn't even belong here. That was it. The chairman stood. Brad, you've been toxic, unethical, and reckless with company funds. That has nothing to do with where anyone comes from, and everything to do with who you are. Brad stood there, breathing hard. Then he grabbed his keys and stormed out. A few minutes later, I saw him in the lobby, holding a cardboard box, looking stunned. We locked eyes. This time, he knew who I was, and he knew exactly what had happened. He'd laughed at my accent. Now he was jobless, humiliated, and out of the company he thought he controlled. Boardroom bloodbath. No mercy. The next week, I walked through the front doors of Gridform again. Only this time, the receptionist stood up when she saw me. Good morning, Mr. Dobrev, she said with a smile. I smiled back. Morning, Julia. How's your first coffee today? Too sweet, she laughed. But not bad. I nodded. Good. We'll fix that too. I took the elevator up to the top floor, the executive level. My name was already on the glass door. Mark Dobrev, CEO. The office still had Brad's smell, cheap cologne and stale energy drink. I opened a window. Fresh air came in. The city outside felt different now. Quieter. Under control. The first thing I did as CEO was call a company-wide meeting. No more hiding. We gathered everyone in the open floor area. People looked nervous at first, some still unsure of what came next. Others looked hopeful. I stepped up, microphone in hand. Most of you don't know me well, I began. Some of you knew me as a consultant. But the truth is, I came here after being laughed at in a job interview by the man who used to run this place. He mocked my accent, said people like me didn't belong here. The room was dead silent. All eyes on me. Well, I continued, starting today, I run this company. And I talk exactly the same way. A few people clapped. Then more. Then it became a wave of applause. I raised a hand to quiet them. We're making some changes. First, we're promoting Priya to lead the engineering team. Second, all unpaid overtime policies are gone. If you work extra, you get paid. Period. Third, anyone who is underpaid under Brad's leadership, HR will be adjusting your salary this month, especially our immigrant and junior staff. The cheers were real this time. Brad's old cronies, his inner circle, stood stiff in the back. I spotted 3 of them, Steve, Margot, and Darren. All of them looked pale. After the meeting, I called each of them into my office one by one. You covered for him, I told Margot. You let him push people out for how they spoke or where they came from. That ends now. They were all let go with full HR documentation. Clean, legal, swift. By the end of the day, the company felt lighter. People walked a little taller. Smiles came easier. Before I left that evening, I passed the front desk again. Brad was there, arguing with security, trying to get back upstairs. I nodded to the receptionist. Julia, can you handle that? She grinned wide. With pleasure, Mr. Dobrev. And that was that. The man who mocked my voice was now being shown the door, while the building carried my name. Funny how that works. 2 weeks after Brad was fired, we got a letter from his lawyer. He was suing us. Claimed it was wrongful termination. That we had no cause. That the foreign guy had a personal grudge and made up stories to get rid of him. I read the letter twice. Then I smiled. I forwarded it to our legal team with a short message. Let's bury him. And we did. We started by organizing every single piece of evidence we had. His Slack messages, his offensive emails, the HR complaints, screenshots, and even witness statements from employees who had worked under him for years. One file after another, stacked and sorted. Our lawyers worked fast. They prepped depositions. We found audio of him saying, I don't trust people who don't speak clean English. That alone would have been enough. But there was more. Turns out Brad had also broken several NDAs. He'd forwarded confidential client data to his personal email. We found it during the audit. That pushed things from just an HR issue to a serious legal one. When the court date came, Brad walked in with confidence. He had a new haircut, a flashy lawyer, and his same old smirk. I sat in the back calm. Then our legal team showed the judge the folder. slide after slide, page after page. His words, his jokes, his fake expense reports, and emails full of petty insults about foreign accents. Brad started sweating by page 3. By page 20, he looked like he wanted to disappear. His lawyer tried to argue context and misunderstanding. The judge didn't buy it. In the end, the court ruled in our favor. Completely. His case was thrown out with prejudice, meaning he couldn't file again. But the damage didn't stop there. One of the journalists who had been watching the company's shakeup got wind of the case. A small piece ran online, not naming names, but making it obvious who the story was about. Then it hit the tech blogs. Fired startup exec tries to sue, gets exposed instead. Industry people connected the dots. Quietly, word spread. Recruiters stopped calling Brad. Investors took him off shortlists. Even his old co-founder distanced himself. He started posting long rants on LinkedIn about cancel culture and immigrants ruining the industry. No one liked the posts. No one replied. The last I heard, he was trying to pitch a new startup idea on a sketchy crowdfunding site. 0 backers. He tried to play the victim. But the truth was out there. In his own words. He gave us everything we needed. In the end, his mouth took him down. All we had to do was show the court. 3 months later, I got an email from a name I hadn't seen in a while. Brad J. Subject: catching up? I opened it. It was short, awkward, and full of fake cheer. Hey man, wild times, huh? Hope no hard feelings. I've been reflecting and trying to grow. Anyway, I saw your company is hiring again. Think we could chat? Maybe there's a role that fits. Would love a fresh start. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I smiled. I replied, sure, Brad. Let's meet this Friday. 2 p.m. I'll have HR set it up. He showed up on time, wearing a cheap suit and holding a plastic folder. His smile was wide but shaky. I could tell he wasn't sleeping well. Mark, he said too loud. Great to see you again, man. I shook his hand. Glad you could make it. I walked him through the office. He looked around like he was visiting an old house he used to own. Some of the staff recognized him but avoided eye contact. I led him to a small conference room. He sat down fast, started talking too much. Honestly, I've changed, he said. Took some time off. Been thinking a lot about leadership growth, you know? I'm ready to be part of something again. Humble, teachable, all that. I nodded slowly. Let him speak. Didn't interrupt. He pulled out a resume. It was padded with vague titles and fake-sounding projects. I took it, glanced at it, and said, you know, Brad, I appreciate you coming in. I think there might be a role we can consider. His eyes lit up. Seriously? Wow. I mean, I know things were rocky before, but... I held up a hand. Before we go further, I should tell you something. He stopped mid-sentence. I leaned forward. Do you remember the interview a while back? The one where you laughed at the guy with the cartoon villain accent. His mouth opened slightly. He blinked. That was me, I said. Silence. He stared at me like I'd just hit him with a brick. I smiled, calm as ever. I never forgot how you made me feel that day, but I learned a lot from it, mostly about who not to be. His face turned red. Look, man, I was going through stuff back then I didn't mean. I stood up. We're not hiring cartoon villains right now, Brad. I walked to the door and opened it for him. He stood slowly, folder in hand, eyes glassy. No more words left in him. I nodded once. Take care. He left without another word. I closed the door behind him, took a deep breath, and exhaled. Some moments don't need shouting. Just the truth. Spoken clearly. Accent and all. 2 weeks after Brad was fired, we got a letter from his lawyer. He was suing us. Claimed it was wrongful termination. That we had no cause. That the foreign guy had a personal grudge and made up stories to get rid of him. I read the letter twice. Then I smiled. I forwarded it to our legal team with a short message. Let's bury him. And we did. We started by organizing every single piece of evidence we had. His Slack messages, his offensive emails, the HR complaints, screenshots, and even witness statements from employees who had worked under him for years. One file after another, stacked and sorted. Our lawyers worked fast. They prepped depositions. We found audio of him saying, I don't trust people who don't speak clean English. That alone would have been enough. But there was more. Turns out Brad had also broken several NDAs. He'd forwarded confidential client data to his personal email. We found it during the audit. That pushed things from just an HR issue to a serious legal one. When the court date came, Brad walked in with confidence. He had a new haircut, a flashy lawyer, and his same old smirk. I sat in the back calm. Then our legal team showed the judge the folder. Slide after slide, page after page. His words, his jokes, his fake expense reports, and emails full of petty insults about foreign accents. Brad started sweating by page 3. By page 20, he looked like he wanted to disappear. His lawyer tried to argue context and misunderstanding. The judge didn't buy it. In the end, the court ruled in our favor. Completely. His case was thrown out with prejudice, meaning he couldn't file again. But the damage didn't stop there. One of the journalists who had been watching the company's shakeup got wind of the case. A small piece ran online, not naming names, but making it obvious who the story was about. Then it hit the tech blogs. Fired startup exec tries to sue, gets exposed instead. Industry people connected the dots. Quietly, word spread. Recruiters stopped calling Brad. Investors took him off shortlists. Even his old co-founder distanced himself. He started posting long rants on LinkedIn about cancel culture and immigrants ruining the industry. No one liked the posts. No one replied. The last I heard, he was trying to pitch a new startup idea on a sketchy crowdfunding site. 0 backers. He tried to play the victim. But the truth was out there. In his own words. He gave us everything we needed. In the end, his mouth took him down. All we had to do was show the court. 3 months later, I got an email from a name I hadn't seen in a while. Brad J. Subject: catching up? I opened it. It was short, awkward, and full of fake cheer. Hey man, wild times, huh? Hope no hard feelings. I've been reflecting and trying to grow. Anyway, I saw your company is hiring again. Think we could chat? Maybe there's a role that fits. Brad tried to bury me because of how I stared at the screen for a moment. Now I run 3 startups, then I smiled, and I still talk the same way. Sure, Brad. After everything with let's meet this Friday. I didn't 2 p.m. slow down. I'll have HR sold the company to a larger firm. He showed up on time, wearing more than enough to retire, holding a plastic but I wasn't interested in his resting. Smile was wide. I had bigger plans. I could tell he started a small fund. Nothing flashy too loud. Just money to back founders like me. I shook his hand. Immigrants. Glad non-native English speakers. I walked him through the office. People with big ideas and he looked around like he was visiting an old house just like I had. I called the fund. Staff recognized him, but avoided eye contact. It took off fast. I led him to a small company we backed was a young woman from Nigeria. He sat down fast, who had an idea for mobile health tracking. Honestly, everyone else passed on her because her pitch had too many grammar issues. Been thinking a lot about leadership. I didn't care, you know. I saw her. I'm ready to be part of. Now her app has 5 million downloads. Teachable, all that. The second was a guy from rural India who built a smart farming platform. Didn't interrupt. He'd been rejected out from every pitch contest. It was padded with vague titles and fake sounding projects. Now he's hiring ex-Google engineers. I took it, glanced at it, and said, we kept going. You know, Brad, quietly. I appreciate you coming in. One founder at a time. I think there might be a role at the same time. Consider. I started speaking his eyes at conferences. Seriously? Not about revenge. Wow. About bias. I know things were rocky about before, how too many people mistake I held up a hand for intelligence. Before we go further, I made sure to tell you slowly, clearly. He stopped me with my accent strong. I leaned forward. Do you remember the interview a while back? It was me on stage. The one where you laughed at the guy with the cartoon villain accent. If someone laughs at your voice, keep talking. One day they might be working free. He blinked. It hit over 1 million. That was me, I said. Shared across LinkedIn, Reddit. He stared at me like I just hit him. That's when the blogs picked it up. I smiled. One tech site ran the headline. I never forgot how you made me feel that day. But I learned a lot the company and fired him. Mostly about who not to be. The story spread like wildfire. His face turned red. And that's when I got the message. I was going through stuff Brad had tried to comment on one of the posts. I stood up. Something bitter and not hiring cartoon villains right now, But by then, Brad, no one was listening to him. I walked to the door and opened it. The replies were brutal. He stood slowly, nobody forgot what he did. Eyes glassy. I didn't respond. No more words left in him. I just kept building. Today, I mentor immigrant founders from over 20 countries. I closed the door behind him. I sit on panels, took a deep breath. I get invited to places. Some moments don't need shouting. Sometimes just the truth still ask. Spoken clearly. Don't you want to change how you speak now that you've made it? I just laugh. Why would I? My accent got me here. And every time I open my mouth, it reminds people. You don't need perfect English to build something big. You just need someone not to laugh when you start. The lights were soft and golden. The ballroom was packed. People from all over the world. Founders, investors, developers, students. All gathered for the annual Diversity in Tech Gala. They'd asked me to close the night with a short speech. As I stepped onto the stage, I felt that old nervousness for just a second. The same feeling I used to get when people looked at me strange for the way I spoke. The same feeling I had when Brad laughed in my face all those years ago. But now I welcomed it. I walked up to the mic, looked at the crowd, and smiled. My name is Mark Dobrev, I began. And yes, I still talk like this. Laughter. The good kind. I paused, then continued. Years ago, I went to a job interview. The guy sitting across from me laughed in the middle of my answer. He said I sounded like a cartoon villain. A quiet murmur rolled through the room. I walked out of that interview. I felt embarrassed. Small. Angry. I took a breath. But I didn't stay angry. I got to work. I made calls. I gathered funding. And 6 months later, I bought that man's company. The crowd gasped, then burst into applause. I fired him. Quietly, legally, and respectfully. Louder applause. I raised my glass of sparkling water. This toast is not about revenge, I said. It's about every immigrant who got laughed at. Every founder who got passed over because their English wasn't clean enough. Every pitch deck rejected for sounding too foreign. Every voice someone tried to silence. I let that settle. You could feel the emotion in the room. I still speak the same way. I still make mistakes in grammar. But now, I mentor over 50 startups. I sit on 5 boards, and I invest in people whose stories sound like mine. People were on their feet now. I smiled again, softer this time. They say success is the best revenge. I say it's the best reply. I raised my glass higher. To every accent they said was funny. May it echo in every boardroom, every stage, and every success story. The room roared. People cheered, clapped, some even wiped their eyes. I stepped down from the stage as the music came up again. People shook my hand, hugged me, asked for advice. And through it all, I kept speaking, accent and all, because now they were listening.
Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.